looks like we're live,
Hello,
Vince.
everybody. All right, I'll start us off. Hello, everybody. I am Barry Allen. I'm the fastest man alive. No, all right, I'm Vince Venturella, and we're just here tonight to do a little hangout to talk about end times Kane magic. So joining me are two gentlemen who need no introduction, but you know they should introduce themselves all the same.
All right, Ant, you go ahead.
I didn't remember my lines. Hello.
All right, and if you're watching this, you're on my channel, and you should know who I am, but I am Matiram.
Or you've clicked a very random link and you have no idea what you're about to see. So come along with us on a magical journey of elven magic cheatery and buffoonery.
Sounds like an intro to a porno.
Which, well, it very well could be random people, because since they started making us announce all of our hangouts publicly, I randomly get these Spanish speakers that, like, pop onto my channel and insult me.
What?
Yeah, like, the last one, like, just popped on and put a comment calling me an ugly bastard in Spanish. Like, I had to go get it translated to find out what the hell it was.
Oh my god. Oh,
Very
that's
nice.
cool.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so obviously both of you gentlemen had battle reports go up in the last 2 days, talking about, you know, where you played through some scenario or some, you know, battle reports where you're using Kane magic. You ended up getting a third battle in last night with it. I know you were still, you had mentioned in your video you were thinking about it.
Yeah, it's done. It's interesting, and it's against Lore Master Hoeth, so with the book, so it's very interesting.
Ouch.
Yeah, the full-on worst-case scenario, as it were. Yeah.
Hey, it was just one wizard. I mean, it could always be worse, right? You could always have another wizard. I wrote up a list for my Wood Elves where I have Brolocks, Sisters of the Thorn, an Archmage, and a Book of Hoeth guy, and it's complete avoidance, all mounted list except for the Book of Hoeth guy. It just runs around and knows 77 spells or something like that.
That's terrible.
Yeah, even magic card decks generally limit themselves to 60 cards, so you know it really is your comparison on times 1,000, even worse. So yeah, what I thought we'd do is I kind of wrote up a little something. I wanted to get this together to talk about it. This has obviously been going around a lot. I threw up a video today where I kind of was trying to suss out some of the things that I consider to be potential downsides of it, and so I wanted to kind of move through the good, the bad, the various pieces of it, and then maybe, you know, how we would implement it, what we see it, could it be fixed, should it be implemented. There's a lot around this. So yeah, that's the general roadmap that I was thinking through. Yeah, any initial thoughts? Let's start with overall feeling on this. Just, you know, a temperature gauge. One being you would like to see this burned, all books that contain this burned, and it's stricken from the records of history, forever forgotten about and never mentioned again. And 10 being you would like to incorporate this into your everyday life to the point where when you wake up you start rolling Winds of Magic to see how much coffee you put in your cup. So somewhere in there.
Oh god.
My vote, and I think I'm going to be charitable in this, and I'm going to give it a 5.
I'm going to give it
I think
2.
No, go ahead.
I was going to give it 2, but you can go ahead and explain 5.
Yeah. I think there are, at its base, there are some good things about it. Like, I like the idea of everybody being lore masters, because it lets you get use out of some of the other lores, and I can see that being a positive thing to the game. And I definitely like the fact that it has pretty much destroyed the idea of 6 dicing your way to victory. So I like that. I just think the way they went about it was heavy-handed. So it's something I think we're still going to experiment with it more at our group, but I'm cautiously pessimistic. Maybe might be the best term.
I like the Lore Master idea as well because as a competitive player it adds more consistency. I don't have to worry that I didn't get Savage Beasts. And I also think that, you know, not 6 dicing your way to victory is a good way to handle it. But I think all they needed to do was say you cast as many dice as your wizard level +1. And I think that solves a ton of problems. It's a really easy thing. They could put that in an errata, right? And we could go upon our merry way with the magic phase and make a lot of people happy. Just put Lore Master in there and wizard level +1 for power dice thrown, and off you go.
Yeah, and it's, the funny thing to me about Magic is that, so like I know, Mitt, I know you've been playing for a while, and I started playing I think like 97, 98, and Magic's one of those things that has had a lot of incarnations, throughout like the history of the game, right? If you look at like how Magic worked over some of the older editions to now, it's a component that has really like had a lot of moving pieces shift around. What wizards do, how power dice work, how you cast spells. That's varied a lot edition to edition. Whereas if you look at like combat, you compare weapon skill to weapon skill, that's been the same for a long time. So I feel like this is one area of the game where they've just never really figured it out. They figured out how to make strength hit toughness 30 years ago, and we still haven't figured out Magic. So we're still trying radically new stuff, right?
Yeah, I think that's valid. And that's why I think I would be very, very surprised if we see this Magic set go any further. It may resemble what we're seeing now when Ninth finally shows its ugly head, but I think this is them just hurling a bunch of shit at the wall to see what sticks.
Yeah, I agree. Like toward the end of 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, this book came out called the Book of Nine Swords, which contained all these very weird mechanics for fighting that were very different than anything else that was in 3rd edition at that time. And then later on, 9 months, year down the line, 4th edition came out, and it looked something like that, and it was clear that like that whole book was just a big playtest of whatever they had been working on for the next edition. But what actually happened in the next edition didn't actually look like that. There were, it was, you could see the sort of the edges of it or whatever. It wasn't the final version. And I hope that's what this is. Not that I don't want to draw an exact comparison because 4th edition D&D was terrible. I don't want to start that fight. But the premise being that hopefully I think you're right, that they're basically just sussing out some concept ideas and then seeing how the people react.
So you don't think the book's at the printer already? I mean, 9th edition's rumored for May, so that gives them 6 months.
Of course, it was also rumored for last summer, so...
Yeah, but that was always a softer rumor. I mean, I got happy about it. I wanted to believe it, but it was always a softer rumor. And there's really no reason now, 5 years down the road, with all the end times, that next year wouldn't be a new edition release. So my belief is it's already been written. And we're not talking about a minor thing like, do we allow Lore Master or not? That's a quick edit, quick relative to printing, 100,000 books. But you're talking about a whole phase, arguably the defining phase for fantasy, a very complicated phase compared to just moving or shooting, right? Those phases of the rulebook are really easy to understand. They're really easy to write. I don't see them throwing this volleyball up in the air this close to the new release date. If they did this a year ago, sure, I would believe that, or maybe even the beginning of this year. But considering we're like 6 months away from potential release, they got to print 50,000 copies of this rulebook plus the starter set book. I just don't see them being a playtesting session. So I don't fully believe that.
See, I don't know. I find myself taking the same information, and what it makes me doubt is whether 9th will be in May. I think if they're only going to limit to 4 End Times books, then yeah, maybe a May release for 9th makes sense. But at this point, they're basically just printing money with the End Times books. I don't see any reason why they're not going to just keep milking that for as long as they can while they finish polishing off what they want in 9th. And as a side benefit, by putting these kind of crazy cracked out rules in End of Times, they get free playtesting, basically. And matter of fact, we pay them for the privilege of playtesting this stuff.
Stopping this is...
I mean, I think you're right that on the scale that they operate at, yeah, 6 months out is when you've got to sort of like hit your code freeze, right? Of like, now is when we lock the design. So I mean, I think you're right there. But I mean, at the very least, who knows? Games Workshop internally, I don't know anything about their processes, but they could be pushing it a little closer they could be in like a late QA right now, and I think it could look a lot like this, but maybe if you're talking about, think of just a few sentence changes that could happen to this that would radically change the way this worked. Here's one simple sentence. Imagine if this following sentence was printed. The minimum number of dice you may use for, you roll a d6 to determine, but the minimum number that caster may use, the caster you choose, is equal to his wizard level. Okay? That's one sentence that gets tacked on, but radically changes the way the whole thing works. Right? Because now that level, it pushed back, and you now have a cross incentive to go back to a level 4, because suddenly they always get 4 and sometimes get 5 or 6. But your level 1 spread out strategy, like the sort of high council build, is now they're straight rolling, right? They have to rely completely on d6. So it could be that little of a thing that just completely changed the system. And I don't know that, given that they don't actually play test, they have no actual play test period. So they pretty much make one final rule change and then send it off to the printers. Gold CD, go.
I think the only playtesting GW does is to make sure the game mechanics physically work. That, you know, it looks good on paper, but then you try to implement it, and it's broken code per se. Kane Times isn't broken code; it's a bad game design, but it's not broken code. And I think that's the limit of Games Workshop's playtesting. I think we're giving them way too much credit here for the amount of effort they've put into playtesting, because we could list dozens of examples of things that both were and were not playtested. They do just kind of come up with ideas. The design team kind of comes up with something. They do just some in-house playtesting, it appears, and that's basically it. So I just don't see them publishing all these rules for Kane, for End Times in general, and then in 9th doing something totally different. So you went from 8th edition system where the rules were X, End Times is Y, and then 9th is Z. That doesn't make any logical sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think the world I would propose, Ant, is that it's like Y prime, right? It's like Y with a slight change. Because if you consider this book was probably finished 6 months ago, right? I mean, we have to draw back the same time, right? Theory Kane was done 6 months ago. So there was some kind of, let's say, 3 to 6 month window in between this being done and now, current time. And that could have resulted in any number of changes. So by the time this goes to print, we've got to remember this was being sent back in June or whatever, you know, I don't know. So there could have been a lot of movement there. So it's not, you're right. I think Z is crazy. I think you're right that this is a window. I'm just saying I think it could end up easily more like Y prime. You know, this evolved or this with minor tweaks. That's what I would say.
Right.
All right. So we've talked a lot around around several things that aren't specific Kane but are Kane adjacent. So let's get into the actual thing itself. I'll quickly just review the pieces of like the high 40,000 foot view pieces of the thing, so everybody's on the same page with us. Because not everybody, since they only printed I think 7 copies of this book, and you know we on this call probably got like maybe 3 of them. So you know, like there you go, right there. No, there's very few left for the broader community. We should do some level setting. So first off, Magic Face 4d6. That's your power dice. The highest of the 2 become the enemy dispel dice. L casters become lore masters. Period. So you get everything in your lore, and I say casters meaning like even your Brolocks and Sisters of the Thorn, which I think that's what I think the community was really like, clamoring for that. The community was like, these Brolocks are terribly underpowered. Is there any way we can also give them Purple Sun? Because I just don't feel like it's enough point. I'm just not getting enough out of them for what I'm paying. I hear that in every video. And then you've got the recast mechanic. Obviously, you can now fire off the same spell multiple times until it's not successful. I don't think we want to spend a half hour talking about the controversy around this. I think all 3 of us are on the same page that if it's dispelled, it shuts off, and that's the interpretation. So I think we can just conduct this discussion under that matrix if that's okay with everybody. And then obviously the addition of the end time spells. There's a bunch of fancy, very high, impossible to ever cast under this system casting cost spells that are crazy, ridiculous, big boom spells that you automatically get access to whenever you take that lore. Did I forget anything?
Well, that's about the size of it.
All right. So why is it bad? Ant, you gave it a 2. Let's hear some negatives. You are our strongest negative voice. Mister. If this is 9th edition, I'm out of here.
I would be out of here if it goes to print with the definitive confirmation that a spell that is successfully casted and later dispelled can be cast again. I'm not changing my position on that. But first of all, like I said, there's 3 things that I measure a game by. It's balance, it's fun. Those are 2 big things right there for me. And this magic system isn't balanced. It's less balancing, which is really hard to do. It's really hard to take the magic phase as it currently is and make it less balanced, and that's what they've done. It's more time-consuming, so it breaks immersion. It's not as competitive, clearly, because you lose control of your magic phase. You spent maybe 500 points on a wizard, and I have no control over this guy. I need to take him, so it's still this obligatory level 4 because I need to shut down enemy magic. But the fact of the matter is that I don't have any control over what arguably might be my queen on the board of chess. There's a very powerful super character that is now at the mercy of a single D6 mechanic. And as we all know, the only way a D6 levels out is with lots of dice. Rolling 20 dice, you'll get much more statistic rates in 4s than just 2. And now we're at the mercy of a single D6. And I just find the overall vibe, and I've spent over an hour in my videos talking about it, and I don't want to spend an hour here, but I don't find it balancing, I don't find it fun, I don't find it competitive, and those are the 3 barometers that I measure things by. So in my eyes, it's just a failure. Outside of the lore master factor, I don't really see too much here that's really enjoyable from anybody's perspective.
And I'm actually going to step in and throw one more negative on top of the giant steaming pile that Anthony just laid down. And this is more of a concern for my kind of folks. It doesn't match the fluff. The wizards in Warhammer are presented as these just gigantic workers of powerful magics, and I mean, none of them are really portrayed as the pew-pew laser gun little crappy spell kind of casters. And with the restrictions on the dice per spell, that's really what you're pushing them to. I thought it was particularly cruel that they introduce all these cool new spells at 15 plus casts when you're almost never going to be able to get them off because of the way the power dice roll out. So I think on top of all of the play issues, now it's harder for somebody like me to represent these wizards in the game how they are in the fluff. And for me personally, that bugs the crap out of me.
So how does a wizard in the lore generate like their powers? Like how do they gather up the winds of magic? I know the winds of magic can ebb and flow at like a macro level. But like how do they... Because I feel like Lore Master makes sense, because I feel if you're a wizard, even a level 1 wizard is a very powerful individual. Everyone runs around with a level 4, but I mean a level 1 is still an incredibly powerful and dangerous person. So I would assume that you would know... There's only 7 spells in the lore. I say only 7. The words you need to say and the order in which you say them, I think, is fairly straightforward and simple. So I don't think knowing all 7 spells is the big burden. I don't think you need to spend a lifetime to learn 7 spells out of the lore. So I think Lore Master makes sense from a lore perspective. But how does a wizard like gather the winds of magic and cast a spell like in the lore?
The way it makes the most of the lore plays out, and I'm going to speak primarily from a human standpoint because it's a little different for the other races. But the idea is that each wizard is kind of attuned to one of the winds of magic more than any other. So it kind of starts off as an innate things happen around me that might be tied in with that magic. Like if you were an amethyst mage, like milk might curdle around you, stuff like that. And so you have to actually go within the colleges to learn how to actively harness that and turn it into worthwhile spell effects. And that's where they learn the spells. But even in most of the lore, they talk about there being hundreds of spells from each wind of magic. And so it's just as there is kind of, you're learning far more spells than could ever be replicated in the game just because of the limitations. And so the way they kind of make out the spellcasting is it's literally using this innate connection with the magic to draw forth the winds of magic, and then what you have learned, the words, the gestures, what have you, is what gives that a specific form. But typically, like I said, most of the writings, everything I've seen at any rate, most of the wizards that they show are these, particularly, God knows the ones that would be level 4s, are like these people who can sneeze and shake continents kind of stuff, not the guy who stands in the back hucking a billion fireballs.
My perspective, I mean, it takes time to say the incantation and do the dance, whatever the hell you have to do to cast a spell. To assume that in the magic phase, in the course of a battle, where everything's supposed to be happening simultaneously, people are charging, missiles are being fired, everything's going on, that a wizard would have enough time over the course of 6 turns, casting 7 spells a turn under this new system, enough time to cast 60 spells over the course of a battle. I mean, how long is this battle? Is this battle all day? For the horses to go from here to there? No, this is probably capturing maybe an hour's worth of action, right? So a wizard's going to cast 60 spells. They're casting a spell a minute. That seems kind of aggressive for something that's so difficult to get off. Yeah, magic just doesn't happen. Some of the level 4s, like you said, can sneeze and move continents, but every one of them, I don't seem to believe that. In a timetable perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, and one I honestly I hadn't even considered it, and I'm ashamed of myself for not doing so, because you're right. I mean, it breaks the sort of verisimilitude of the world and how we knew it worked, right? I mean, there's this expectation of how magic is, and then and like I understand they're trying to couch it in some kind of lore reasons, but the problem is that the explanation of the lore reasons of this breaking of the vortex doesn't match up within the system that's been meant to quote unquote replicate that effect.
Right. But come on, you knew if anybody was going to pick that up, it was going to be me. So
absolutely, absolutely, sir. I think there's even more. Like I have 2 more on top of. I agree with. Let me say first, I agree with everything that's been said by both of you, and I think there's 2 more. So here's my 2. 1, this is unbelievably complicated for newer players. Like if the 50% Lords and Heroes was meant to make it easier to collect an army and be a new player and come in and be like, ooh, neat, I can buy this big shiny box and like a couple things of Warriors and Chariot, I'm good to go, yay, army, fantastic, fine, whatever. I like new people, good, growing the hobby's good. This is the opposite move from that. Like, rocketing the complexity up to 11 in this phase does not anyone help. I can't imagine being a new person and coming in and reading this and being like, oh yeah, I can imagine how that would work. What? No way. It's mind-boggling. And then on top of that, even once they understand it, there's the Othello syndrome of like, is that right? That's that little game with white and black pieces, right? I don't know, whatever. It's a minute to learn, a lifetime to master. I remember the commercial. And so like the problem is this hidden complexity, because even if they understand the actual mechanics, choosing right and not just trying to cast off a bunch of big spells and failing to get the dice, and there's just so much that would confound a new player and give them this terrible play experience to where they would hate this phase of the game. Whereas the old world, it was like, you get some dice, pick your 2 or 3 spells you want to cast, decide how you divide up your dice, roll those things, they'll either dispel you or you'll get them. Oh, okay. There you go. And the other one that seems like a problem to me, and this is what came up to me watching your game, is just the mental bookkeeping of this. This is a big thing, like in RPG design, which was my background. You gotta be very careful of how much you make the players keep track of in their heads at any given point in time, because people forget crap. And when you had like 4 buffs running on one group and like another magic is still going on and shooting in the normal combat interactions, I can't even. How often do we forget 1 buff? I can't even imagine keeping 2, 3 buffs on 3 different units, plus these other random remains and play effects. Oh, there's a magical vortex roaming around somewhere too, and every other special rule is still in play.
And I tell you, the funny thing to add on to that complexity, that particular magic phase in that battle report was like 22 dice strong for me. So I got all 4 of those buffs off. I think I threw a couple of magical missiles, and then I just gave up on my magic phase, and I still had 5 or 6 dice left in the pool, just because I was so tired of casting spells. I mean, it was exhausting. It took freaking 15 minutes for that magic phase, and that was me being totally unopposed. I mean, they were tossing their D6s, I had no bonuses to dispel, so I was getting everything off. So even succeeding every time, I finally was just like, you know what, screw it. It's not worth the extra 10 minutes to finish these 6 power dice, and we just ended the turn, or ended the magic phase.
Well, actually, when I was documenting for my battle reports where you see all the bullets of this, how many dice and stuff, I actually thought it was just going to be for me, but my opponents were asking me as well, how many dice do I have left? How many times have I cast this? Can I cast this spell again that I casted 3 spells ago? Did it go off successfully, depending upon the interpretation we were using? And then when we got to combat, I had to consult my notes for my battle report, so I could see myself having to bring a whiteboard, a little mini whiteboard, and writing down, this spell was cast, hit this unit, and I have this many dice left. You know, because otherwise, what am I going to do? I'm going to have 4 or 5 copies of the magic cards, so I can pile them on top of each other next to the unit. I mean, typically, if I put curse on the unit, I'll throw the curse card by them, so I know they got it on them. But when you can cast it multiple times.
The one thing this might do for Lord Tremendous's friend Token Gal, she'll get just a bunch of business, which is everybody will buy 1,000 sets of tokens.
Business is booming. Yeah, I don't. I don't think these magic spells, they clearly were not designed to be cast multiple times, and that's my concern. Now you have the whole question of where do people cap? Do you cap at 1 or do you cap at 0? You know, I think the game says you cap at 1, but I mean, what happens when I push you to -4 to hit? I know they say hitting on a 6, but you know, I can make you leadership 0. You know, what happens when you get to that point? There's things in the game where it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense from the lore perspective and everything else, like we've been saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, everybody hated Wither for a reason, right? Because Skaven had this broken sort of old edition spell that could come in and sort of repeatedly, permanently lower toughness, right? And now it's like everybody, so we had this thing we really hate, and we're like, hey, everybody, do that. Do that a lot. Do that thing you really hate. Everybody. And yeah, like, that game you had, like, I know that the way it was played, you were using the other interpretation and such, but the one with the high elves, I mean, yes, you know, you were playing that you still cast with a dispel, but I don't think what was happening was that out of the box for a situation that could have evolved, you know, in a game where they did shut off with it. And the way units were just like ping-ponging around in power to where it was just like, oh, normal unit, crazy unit, weak unit, just it was bonkers. Oh, by the way, I was happy to see those men-at-arms on the table.
Of course, I gotta say, just from a purely selfish point of view, I am just chomping at the bit for my first ogre game where I can buff my Noblars to 10 strength.
Yeah, I mean, people were saying, like, the guy, literally when I went to the store that night, he didn't know we were going to do Kane times. He pulled out his old list. He didn't even have all the models. That's why he had that cardboard cutout. And he took it and he ran with it. Now, he's a smart player, so I don't blame him for that. But, I mean, like he said, this is build your own Death Star now. You can totally build this god unit if you get the ball rolling. And I'm telling you now, from a competitive perspective, elves got even more powerful. Not only can you put them all together now, but you want to hear something really filthy, the key to winning these games now is having magic dominance. The key to magic dominance is eliminating enemy wizards. You know who kills enemy wizards really well? Death magic users, so there's your Brolocks, and Waste Stalkers. 70, 80, 90 point, whatever they are, really cheap guys. And wizards at toughness 3 and toughness 4 with no armor normally or save are very easy for 10 Waste Stalkers, because I can take 50% heroes, to run around the board, shoot off all your wizards in 2 turns, and now I run the table with my Book of Hoeth guy that's out of the High Elves, and my Brolocks, and my Sisters of the Thorn. And this will happen, and that's why we need comp, because people will build this and do this. But
my Hellheart just got a heck of a lot more awesome.
Yeah, your Hellheart can be really great, but the Hellheart's still, it's still random. I don't think you're going to see more wizards. I think you're going to see more wizards out of different lores. You're going to see 3 wizards, probably, in most people's list, but it's all going to be different lores, one of which is going to be the Book of Hoeth dude. Another one's going to be an Archmage. You're going to see units of wizards, Sisters of the Thorn, and Brolocks. So you're going to have, access to all 8 book lores, plus the lore of high magic, plus the lore of dark magic. And talk about the dark magic, the Dark Elves breaking magic, getting infinite power dice, potentially, with that dark magic spell that gives them even more dice. They get that off 2 or 3 times, they could have a 15 dice lead. Easy.
The other thing I think you're going to see, and not a lot of people have talked about this, I think you're going to see a lot of bound spells. I mean, the Ruby Ring of Ruin, that's 3 points. That's a 1 dice. The War Altar's Banishment. I mean, that's what, a 5 cat. That's going to be going off like crazy. I mean, hell, now for 100 points, you can make anybody a lore master of a random lore with the freaking hat. You're going to start seeing those weird magic items that nobody was playing with because it gives them access to low-level or easy-to-cast magic spells just going nuts.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right on the bound spell thing, because with those bound spells before, yeah, sometimes you could hold them back, wait till the end of a phase when you've drained off their dice, and you get a couple in. But now it's like you drain off their dice, you got 10 dice left, I'm just going to 1-die this Ruby Ring until I don't, until the die happens to turn against me in one way or another. I guess I got a 1 or 2 natural on the dice or something like that. But, I mean, yeah, it's just going to become fireball, 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 and then eventually that'll, of course, is building on itself given the fire lore signature thing. And those just become infinitely more cheater at the end of a phase when the tank is empty on the enemy side.
So let me ask you a question, Vince, since you're a demon player too, because I was sitting around today not figuring out how this would work. Any idea how the blue scribes would work now?
No, I didn't even think about that, honestly. I'd have to pull it out and like reread the text to get familiar with it.
What about the Reign of Bullshit?
Crazy, probably. I mean, a bunch of things in the Demons book just went nuts with this. Not to mention the fact that in this, and if you thought the Reign of Bullshit table was bad before, you're really going to hate it now, even in a normal game, because on 46, to determine the result on the Reign of Bullshit table, you take the highest 2d6, meaning that I'm very unlikely to get my crappy lower word save result and very likely to get my everybody gets better result. So, good times for you.
Mic may not be working. Can you guys hear me? There we go. For playing with the End Times 2 with the Ascended, like I was playing Demonic Orchard, we were playing with the End Times rules, which was the demon thing too. He rolled 2 1s for his Winds of Magic because we were rolling 2 dice separate. Another reason why I didn't put this battle report up. And he's like, okay, with the Ascendant rules, I can just choose to, because it's doubles, get a free unit. I don't even take everyone takes an instability test. I just pop out a free unit. Okay, so I'll take 8 Demonettes instead of, everybody takes. So there's nothing bad now on the Reign of Bullshit table, and that table is definitely game-changing. He made my level 4 run off the board before she even went, because he hit her with the thing, and she failed her test, and she died. So, demons, awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that all in all, like, what this all says to me is that this is, I don't remember whose video I was watching, but somebody made a point that the rich get richer in this scenario and the poor get poorer. And I think that's exactly what you just sort of like had pointed out. It's what you saw. Like the elves, more powerful. They have all the right tools to capitalize on this. They were already probably the top 2 armies. They shoot off the roof. Demons were already pretty good, arguably really filthy depending on build. They get really better. All like the Chaos Combined Force and all that, warriors. All those people who are already at the top, who had really strong magic and casters, who can capitalize on this, all get richer, and the people who are at the bottom dealing with lesser lores and stuff like that, they get poorer and can't work this in the same way that those better people can.
Mm-hmm. Well, I tell you, man, I'm glad I got rid of my dwarves when I did, because if this was becoming a general thing, I'd put them to hell. I'd put them to hell on. I mean, they've got to. They're gonna have to get something in one of the End Times books coming up to do something better with magic, because I mean they can't handle.
Well, it turns
even
into
a dwarf is.
It turns into I take 6 runesmiths and they all have spell eaters. So I start trying to spell eat your spells, or as many as I possibly take. It turns into I take 1 unit in core and I camp in a corner with 9 war machines, because war machines are actually fairly hard to damage with magic. Magic missiles usually aren't strong enough. Comet is always a threat, but you just make sure you stop Comet or eat Comet. And
unless you're the beastmen with their new spell that does strength 10 hits to any war machine in any building on the table.
Well, that spell's hard to get off, as you said, right? That spell's hard to get off, and generally war machines are missile immune. So let's take the game to a really fun place. Here's 9 war machines. Now, 2 organ guns, 3 cannons, 3 grudge throwers. I'll take some flame cannons because I'm not going to take any real units because real units are bad, for the dwarves right now. So, have fun. It creates those kinds of builds, and I think it degrades the quality of the game overall for everybody.
I think that's absolutely valid.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what we want to see is I think the ideal world is that triangle, that rock, scissors, paper environment where you kind of have to spread out to all sides of the triangle because you need to have all the proper pieces to counter everything else, right? Like, and they're going to have rocks, papers, and scissors, and you better show up with rocks, papers, and scissors, or if you don't, you're not going to have the right answer to some component of their army. And that's what you want to see. So the second you start getting off into like super skew lists being the right answer and not just like a funny trick to try to surprise the meta and show up and win, I think you absolutely just degrade the game as a whole. I think that's right.
Of course, I think even to begin with, before this Magic, I think Warhammer kind of lend itself to the power of skew lists, and I think this just ratchets it up to 11.
Right, yeah, there's definitely clear winners and losers in fantasy, and surprise, surprise, the mechanic of being able to reroll all my dice with the Book of Hoeth or a 2-up ward with the Banner of the World Dragon, or just ignoring miscast like Brolocks or ASF, not only letting you go first, but reroll against just about everybody. Obviously, the army that has all these reroll mechanics is doing really well. Book of Hoeth makes magic phases on 2 dice, or even 1 dice, very reliable. When I get to reroll everything in combat, even if I'm debuffed 3 times. When I debuffed the High Elf player 3 times and his Lord went from hitting on a 3 to hitting on a 5, he didn't care. He has ASF. He's going to hit on 5s with a reroll. Mathematically, that comes out to what? Maybe 1 less hit? He doesn't care. He's cool with it. Where, like, my Lord got debuffed and was hitting on -2. Now he can't really fight. Big difference there. So definitely clear winners and losers, and GW seems to really like the elves. It just seems to be.
And there are some. I think there are some sleeper winners too. Like, it occurred to me when I was thinking about it the other day, Slaughtermasters just became way better in combat than they used to be. Because now you can sit there, you give them some ability to do a little bit of damage, and then they're going to cast God knows how many spells every turn, potentially healing each spell they cast and getting a +1 to the next cast. So it's like, you got to do 5 or 6 wounds. They're immune to poison already, so you're not going to sneak any cheap ones through. And then next magic phase, they're going to heal up 4 or 5 wounds pretty casually and be back in your face again.
The one thing I question is, what was GW's goal with this move? Like, I understand the move within the Gosh, right? That was a logical move. We want everybody to have the lore of undeath. We want everybody to buy all these models. From a business perspective, to me, that makes sense. With Glotkin in the end times, we want Beastmen to be doing better. We want people to buy the new models we put out for it. Makes sense. Kane, there were... I don't even know. Were there any new models with Kane? I don't remember seeing any. So there was no real product release, right? There's only a couple hundred books, as you said, printed. So, I mean, there was some book sales going on there, but I don't believe books are very profitable for GW because those books are expensive to produce. They probably make more money on the digital versions and stuff, but probably more people pirated the book than ever bought this book, which is another issue entirely. But I don't understand this direction because elves were already very good and they're already very popular. So you're going to get some sales with some people jumping to elves, and you're going to get some sales where somebody had, like me, wood elves, and they're like, oh, if I want to jump on this bandwagon, I'll buy a couple $100s of dark elves and high elves. But also on the back end, you have a lot of people getting rid of armies, potentially stepping out of the game, that cost-benefit analysis of breaking stuff. And I just feel like from a business perspective, from a money-making and growing the game perspective, this third release was probably the worst business decision compared to the other 2, which were both very good, in my opinion, for them.
Yeah, you may be right, and I can only really speak from what I'm seeing. I think to a certain degree, a lot of the wailing and gnashing of teeth is maybe a little more for show. I don't know a whole lot of people who at this point are throwing their paws away and stepping away. Maybe when it comes to 9th, we'll see more of that. But for me, I mean, I have never given 2 thoughts to playing an elf army. Didn't care about them at all. And I read through this book and the fluff more than the rules, but it made me want to go out and start an elf army. Now, the only reason I haven't is because if I start a 6th army, my wife will kill me. But I mean, it definitely lit the fire in somebody who has never cared about playing elves before. So I think there's a certain amount of success in that.
Well, I think a lot of the players were already playing elves. That's what I'm saying. Like, this was an opportunity for Beastmen. This was an opportunity for Warriors of Chaos. Vampire Counts and Tomb Kings were both middle of the road to Tomb Kings just being an awful army. So this was an army that was already lowly represented in the community, and now it's represented more because of the rules. Elves were already highly represented in the community, so the market share for elves was already very large. There's not much more of a market share to get compared to if they did, like, let's say, a Bretonnia one, where there's no representation, and they made everybody get a 12-foot Bretonian boner and go out and buy Bretonians. There's a larger capture market share there, and that's purely a business thing.
Of course, that would be a very short book, Anthony. How many pages did they get with the last 6 guys who are alive in Bretonnia talking to each other?
Probably
the
3
Bretonians
pages.
are figured in every book. I mean, somebody's had to get punched in the teeth every single book, so it's fine. I mean, they're the most common character. It's just they're the rope-a-dope, just getting beat up by everybody who happens to wander through the West Coast.
Right, yeah, maybe it's because it's the 3rd book and they eventually have to do everybody, so there's the law of diminishing returns here. But I mean, if they did another army or another grouping of armies, I think there was more opportunity for more market share and more sales to be made because, like I said, elves are already, especially Dark Elves and High Elves, they're everywhere. You go to a grand tournament, out of 100 armies, 40 of them are going to be Dark Elves and High Elves. I mean, that's a huge share for 2 out of the 15 armies, 16 armies, because Chaos Dwarves are there too. So...
When I look at it like this. There are 3 releases, and each one has 2 books, right? They're encouraging us to break it up in this way, fluff and mechanics, right? I mean, they themselves decided to divide the books like that. The first one, Nagash, was a success in both. It did nice things fluff-wise. It was a cool story. Most people like Nagash, like the storyline, did cool stuff, advanced the world, yay fun, and it did cool stuff mechanics. Some controversial, but some good. It buffed up Tomb Kings and stuff like that, armies that probably needed it, gave VC some fun options. The world didn't fall off its axis or anything like that. So it was generally a success in both regards. Second one, so you got Glocken. What happened there? Well, generally, you had, again, fairly favorable success in mechanics. Yeah, there's probably some filth that comes out of it. But again, like Beastmen got the biggest bump. Good for them. They've needed some attention for a long time. So thumbs up there. In general, no mechanical great controversies or anything. But what failed in that one was the fluff. Like the Glocken story, I thought, and Mid, I know we've talked about this previously, just forgettable, right? Like it just wasn't interesting, really, when it came down to it. It felt like it was like the opening act. I mean, that's how the whole thing's set up. Yeah, it's Archeon just sending out this dude being like, hey, go keep him busy for a little while, see what you can kill. Well, that's great. I don't want to read about that. That could have been 3 pages in the actual Chaos book. Then these 3 really big, crazy Nurgle dudes wandered in and killed a bunch of people. It was nuts. And that would have been fine. Like, that's all the wrap-up I need. Good stuff. And then the third
Shazam
book,
was born.
yeah. And then Shazam was born. Yeah, exactly. And then the third book is exactly flip-flopped. Like, the Elvish story was really cool and compelling, and it's this very, like, soap opera drama of the elves all murdering each other, and little friends become enemies, and enemies become friends, huh? It's like, it's Stewie's little how to write a novel syndrome, but it was good. It was compelling and fun, but the mechanics, nothing there. Like, to me, that was the utter failing of this book, and that is so much more egregious, because the mechanics have to work with the fluff, or else they reverse make the mechanic, or they make the fluff fail and seem false and hollow, right?
Yeah. And that was actually one of the few beefs I had with the fluff was the one scene where Tyrion brings his people to go after the Ever Queen, and they're fighting with a bunch of the Wood Elves and stuff. And you can tell that they decided they were really going to try and push the sale of those arcane fulcrums again. Because, like, out of nowhere, she just summons up this arcane fulcrum and starts casting spells off of it. And it was so down your throat, totally interrupted the flow of the entire scene and broke me free of it. And I was like, you guys are dealing with crappy mechanics, and now you're forcing them into the fluff. Back up.
I don't. It may just be me, and I very far read the least of everyone, but I have never found the fluff to match the tabletop ever. So that's why I'm a big proponent of not reading it, because I'm such a gamer. And things get retconned, things appear out of nowhere, and some things are supposed to be badasses and they're god awful. Some things are god awful and they're badasses. And I don't find that the lore attaches to the game mechanics, and hence why I keep them in two totally separate places in my mind. So I think GW naturally splitting them is good and convenient. But I've never felt that connection, except for some named characters, which are very easy to do. Yeah, Nagasha's a badass mofo in the lore, and then he's a badass mofo on the table. It's easy to put two and two together for individual named characters. But in general, if we're talking about a Bretonnian lord or an Empire swordsman, the lore does not match the game at all. And part of that's restricted because you can't have 100,000 Skaven slaves on board. But part of that's also just the general power level of Joe the swordsman. Sometimes he's a god in the lore, sometimes he's not, but it doesn't seem to match, in my mind at least. Maybe I'm missing something because I haven't read enough. But
see, for me, I think it definitely does fit. I mean, yeah, you have some extreme examples, and like when you have the random story of the super awesome swordsman, but even that, I think, it's one of those things that can happen. Like the other game we played that night, and I don't have a battle report of this, but a halberdier champion murdered a Nurgle Knight champion in the challenge. That's the kind of thing that's like the 1 in a million that they write the stories about. So I don't really see that as being a big deal. And the only other time I don't think it really fits with the fluff is when they try hard, but the mechanics don't work. I think the biggest example of that is the Grail Knights out of Bretonnia. They tried giving them something a little different, making them unique. I mean, they're two attacks where pretty much everybody else in Bretonnia is one. They give them the magical attacks and stuff like that. And I think it's not necessarily so much as the fluff not matching the crunch, but the crunch being so old it can't possibly match anymore because the rules around it have changed so much.
Yeah, and I think if you look at, I think you're right that there's a lot of army to army in this, because like if you look at what, to me, one of the most fluff matching armies, like you mentioned the 1,000 Skaven slaves, but really Skaven is a very like fluff equivalent army, and like if you look at that, that's super verisimilitude the way it's written. You can fire into the slaves, and life is cheap, and all these, like, they do actually replicate all of these things they talk about in the fluff. And what came out the other side is this crazy complicated army with all these things that blow up and have charts and do all this stuff, but that was how they got to actually replicate that. So, there could be downsides to trying to skew too close to your narrative, right? And that you can often overcomplicate things.
Yeah, I can see that, but I tell you, for me personally, if I wasn't able to make that connection between what's going on the board and what's going on in the narrative, I wouldn't be playing this game. So I think it depends on how much you want it to, ultimately. Because, yeah, I mean, if there's a lot of ways to take if you're taking just the best competitive stuff where it's going to seem a little weird and not match. But it's there if you're looking for it, I think is ultimately how it works.
So what's full circle for Kane that justifies, not only everyone becoming a lore master, but, just being able to cast more spells faster? Is it just because, the tank is now overflowing with magic, and if I hiccup, I create a spell? I mean, what is their argument?
Well, sort of. Lore-wise, what you're looking at, you got to remember that all magic comes from chaos. And so the realm of chaos, where literally any thought becomes reality, is essentially max magic. That's what magic would be without any of the pesky reality getting in the way. Magic as it's existed up to Kane is actually a result of the original sort of tempest of magic being contained on Ulthuan and being sort of drawn in to those 8 recognizable lores. Now that button has gone away, you've taken a step closer to that chaos where every thought creates reality. The only thing now that's stopping you are these linchpins that are now embodying the magic, and just some of the rules of reality that are still standing. So I think ultimately in a fluff, it's trying to show you that the material world is gliding a little bit closer to the realm of chaos in terms of possibilities.
You know, and I think that what this was to me, I think one of the things I mentioned was this feels like they swung for the fences, and they just hit air, right? Like they were just going to absolutely trying to knock it out of the park, and to do so they just put everything into it, and it ended up being a whiff. Like I think the big question in my mind is, why did we need all of these pieces, right? Because if you were trying to replicate the fluff, they could have just said, okay, so the Tempest is down, you know, Kalidor's free, there's no more whatever, and so now everybody, it's 46 magic bases, right? And that's it, and you take the IS-2, and like we could have stopped there. Or we could have just said, now you could recast, because it's easier to hold on to magic after you throw it, or something like that, right? You could have picked any one of these things and still got at it. Why did they just shotgun everything?
Well, I think the other thing that you're sort of missing out with both of those two is that GW has always represented magic as being of chaos, and therefore difficult, if not impossible, to control in the long term by mortals. So I think for their idea is that, yes, we need to power it up, but you can't have that power be equal sort of one-to-one. Now wizards are just uber badass because they still have a symbol of control, just now get more of it. So I think they threw in the random dicing part of it to represent that lack of, that there's so much power, it's out of control. It's like trying to be one dude holding onto a fire hose.
I don't know. I thought with more winds you would be able to cast larger spells easier, and that's the exact opposite of the mechanic. The mechanic is now you have a lot of winds, you can cast a lot of little spells easier, and I'd be much more comfortable from a lore perspective saying now I can rock out 2 or 3 purple suns a turn because the winds are so strong, there's so much here, I can harness enough energy, collect enough of it in my magical net to then throw on you these massive, devastating spells. But now it's become, it's real easy at the snap of my finger I can create 7 fireballs because it's almost impossible to create a large spell.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I'm just giving kind of the understanding as to why it would work like this. I don't think this was successful in doing what they wanted to at all. I personally think they could have done something like, okay, you have extra dice, but if you're casting a spell that's casting cost 15 or higher, any doubles results in a miscast. And that would represent more the, we have lots of power and we can do it, but the more we draw upon it, the less control we have.
So with a miscast from the lore, and I know the 40k lore for a miscast, you create, you're like a glowing beacon in the warp in the 40k, and whenever you use psychic powers, which is magic and fantasy, demons and terrible shit is attracted to you, like a moth to a candle. So when I'm a wizard in the fantasy world and I'm casting magic, a miscast, I guess, is supposed to represent what? Is it supposed to represent the demons of chaos coming through from their dimension to take me back to the netherworld? Because then in that situation, I'd like to see the miscasts occur more often. Because with all this extra power, wizards are able to do more, but also if chaos is more prevalent in the world, which it is, they should be miscasting more often. Miscast should be more terrible.
As I've always understood it in fantasy, it's not so much that the demons are actively popping out to get you, it's that you're messing with that chaos has caused a micro breach in the wall that separates the real world from the realm of chaos. And that's why it's kind of the effects are random, because it's basically you open a window and get blasted with essentially concentrated chaos. And sometimes it's a blowback and you get sucked through that hole you just created and that sort of thing. So that's how I've always seen it in the lore.
And let me just say that if you did just add, like, let's just say it was just an addition of more dice, you will see more miscasts just based on that alone, right? Because if there are more dice and I'm casting more spells, then there are more miscasts. That's simple math, right? Like if I used to throw an average of 12 dice in a phase, assuming none of them were just one at a time, and now I throw 18 dice in a phase, whatever. I mean, I'm just picking 2 numbers. Don't take them as dictum or anything. But there will be more miscasts. That's simple reality. And I think of like it's just you have the same chances on any grouping of dice to get those sixes. Like that one of them comes up sixes, as it were. And if you start tossing twice as many miscasts start booming off.
I didn't think there'd be more miscasts. I mean, that is simple math, and that's how it works. But I mean, I can tell you from the competitor perspective, every Magic phase, I was going to the table with the goal of miscasting because I was picking up my 6 dice, which maximizes my chance. I think the math is like a 1 in 4 to throw 2 6s with 6 dice. And every player, every Magic phase, so the 12 Magic phases we have, is trying to miscast. So I would think that, yeah, there's more spells being cast now, but with a lot less probability to miscast. 1 dice, 2 dice, maybe 3 dice are being thrown. Anything more than that, most people aren't throwing that many dice in this Kane Magic system. Now, that being said, I've seen a lot of miscasts in my past few games, but I mean, I don't see how there would be more because there was less spells being cast, but with a higher probability in the current system, the old system, I guess, to get that miscast. And that was a goal that you were setting out to trying to achieve.
See, and for me, that's actually the biggest frustration with the Magic system as it worked in 8th, is it just flies in the face of the entire lore, as they present Magic as something dangerous, that the practitioners and the mages are working very carefully with their spells to not breach chaos, and the idea in the fluff that any mage would specifically try to miscast, particularly routinely, like it happens in the game, is just so nonsensical. I personally think they should have just gotten rid of the double 6 being an auto cast rule, and just not messed with it.
Well, obviously that's one of those things that used to be different because it used to be the two ends of the spectrum, right? The double 1s were the miscast and just auto fail with the negative result. The double 6 was the total irresistible force with all positive result. I saw like Wahoo Warrior on the Warhammer YouTubers put up an interesting video today and he had a little video of like suggesting fixes to the Warhammer Kane Magic system. And what interested me was he had a suggestion where he said he thought that the miscast chart should look like the steam tank chart. Okay, and by that what I mean is the more dice you use, there's like a base D6 you roll plus the number of dice that you use to cast the spell. So then when you miscast, if you think of like the steam tank, if you have 5 steam points, you get that 3, that's blow up, right? That's the way you actually explode the thing. But if you only ever use like 4 steam points, you can't actually achieve that explosion. The worst you can do is vent steam. So the table is effectively still like 1 through 12, but the more dice you use, you're effectively rolling a d6 plus 6 if you 6 dice a spell, and so you have this much higher chance to end up at these sort of cataclysmic results. And the table would be rejiggered to be, lesser at the bottom and stronger at the top. And I thought that was a very interesting suggestion, because that would curb the 6 dicing except when you needed to, while at the same time lessen that. I mean, we've all done it, that 2-3 dice end of game garbage. You're going for some simple buff spell. It has no, you're doing it because you kind of need it, and then boom, oops, 2 6s, oops, blew up my wizard, oops, there goes the game, because I cast some stupid spell off that should be wrote for this wizard, right? And that would lessen that, because the worst thing could happen is like a hit kill or something.
That's a great idea. I mean, I was always of the mindset, one of the thoughts I would have done to change the Magic phase was to make it impossible to miscast on the signature spell of the lore. If it's so common that every wizard has learned how to do it as their primary apprenticeship thing, you'd figure they'd have that one down. So the idea of sort of rating those miscasts, I totally would support that.
I think the conclusion here is lots of people have said lots of fixes to this that were very simple to implement. Could have been put in an errata, could have been 1 sentence in a Kane book. And GW did none of those things. Now, I know they don't listen to the community. I understand that. But if in 5 minutes of reading the rules, I came up with 3 fixes, and you came up with 3 fixes, and you came up with 3 fixes, when they were writing these rules, some of these ideas must have flown past their head. Wizard level +1, steam tank table. They didn't grab any of these easy straws, and they went straight to the hardest thing. and I'm not a game designer like Vince, but in business you do the simplest and smallest changes first, and then you add on. You don't go for the monster goddamn super thing. You make small tweaks and you make small adjustments to a system that people were generally happy with. So I don't understand how, as a game designer, they flew past all of these simple things they could have done to spin Magic up here, and went with all these crazy, out-of-the-box, you know, the banana's now a battleship kind of ideas. I don't understand how designers, they did that.
Well, I think part of it is exactly what you're saying, is that they don't pay attention to the community. They don't pay attention to the people that actually make use of the game, so they're kind of too close to the problem to see clearly. I mean, and so they're thinking this very insular kind of thinking, where the only people they're talking to are themselves and each other, and these ideas just kind of snowball, where if they had some way of communicating with the community, it would give them an outsider's perspective that might make some of these, what we see as simpler suggestions, actually come through.
Yeah, here's my only ray of hope on all this. So, you know, and I mentioned this, I think, in a comment on one of your vids, and was when you look at the initial Nagash book and you look at like the framing of the 50% Lords and Heroes and the way that that was set up in there, like that was set up as, these are the new rules for Warhammer. Get used to it. Get on board. Like the text was literally like, this replaces the rules in the base rulebook. Okay, and I don't. Again, I'm not sure how that would, like. There was a lot of argument over it. Whatever. To me, it was never in question. They were absolutely intending to say, this is how it's going to be. So get on the train, folks. Okay, and fine, whatever. Tournaments comp it out, or you know, at your friendly table, whatever. I don't care. But they were making a. They were putting a flag down and saying, this is where the base rulebook is and probably will be. So I think it was easy to read the tea leaves and say, that's definitely not. With this, my only ray of hope is, if you look at how this is phrased in there, this is a unique Magic system made to suit the events of this book and End Times. If you want to play this optional system, or one of these 4 scenarios comes up, one of which is you decide you want to do it, even if your opponent doesn't care, which is the stupidest phrases ever on an optional. Hey, I built my whole army to take advantage of this. Did you want to play it? No. Too bad. Roll and bones. All right. So,
table flip.
Like, yeah, exactly. But my hope is that they did couch this much more optionally, and so at the least, it tells me that even they didn't have the same level of perhaps certitude with it as they did with like the 50% Lords and Heroes, to say, hey, this is how it is, people. You know, buy your ticket, punch it, train's leaving the station. This is more like, we're going on a stroll in the country, come along if you want. If not, stay here. That's how I feel about it. And so that's what gives me some small ray of hope, naive as it may be.
I don't know. You're going to see a lot of people change their armies for these rules. Where they get allowed and where they don't doesn't matter. A lot of people are going to make a lot of changes to these rules, and if they go back on them, that's going to destroy people. Because if I build my list around this Magic system, which I very well could, and then 6 months later, 9th edition looks nothing like it, and it's not even a legal list anymore, you know, that's going to create a lot of turmoil with the customer and a lack of trust with GW. That at least GW don't like the changes GW makes, but when they make it, they stand by it and they implement it going into the next system, like 50% Lords and Heroes. That's implemented. That's going to stay, and I feel confident with it. The one thing scaring me about this Magic system is I would be more accepting of it if I knew it was treated like the Lords and Heroes, where it says, this now replaces Magic, suck it up and deal with it, this is our game. It's in this gray area, and it's going to be a long time till 9th, at least 6 months, and that's a long time in this game. For opportunities for people to go out, buy new miniatures, and I'm sure GW is looking at the short-term sales, but long-term, 6 months, a year down the road, when you lose that customer because they went, what, I spent $500, and now 6 months later I can't use any of these toys, I just finished painting them, writing my lore and my narrative or whatever, F you, GW, I'm done now, which I could see a lot of people doing with that. I mean, that's just short-sightedness, and of course GW as business people would do that, but it's just another black eye, and that uncertainty, I think, is what's upsetting me more than anything, to be honest with you.
Of course, I'll say this. That's an excellent point, Anthony. Maybe part of the reason why there wasn't any model release alongside this book. If they were pretty solid in what they were doing in Nagash and Glotkin enough to provide new models with the understanding that folks who buy them will be able to use them in the next the next edition, maybe the fact that they didn't make any models that specifically draw on these rules is a sign of sort of GW's uncertainty on their viability in the future.
Yeah, I was really surprised we didn't see like a fantasy Kane, the bloody-handed god of Kane, for like $150. People would have bought that. I might have even bought it just because it would look so friggin' cool if you look at like their Forge World model for $40K.
They were too busy making Smog for the
Oh
Hobbit.
my god, I was about to make that same joke. I was like, they were too busy making $500 Smog. I swear I was about to say that same thing. Yeah, exactly. Takes a lot of time to crank out $500 Smog. Can't be doing elves. We got Smog.
Right.
Oh god. Smog. I haven't even looked at it yet.
We've been going for
it's
a
a
while
beautiful
on this.
model. I'll give them that.
Yeah, it's a good model. At the same time, let me just point out Reaper Bones has Caldraxis or whatever, which is like a big, giant undead dragon that's the same size, and he's $65. I'm just saying, hey, you know,
we've got that.
It's a beautiful
The
model.
funny part is we've got that and extra left leg, because when we got it originally from the Reaper Kickstarter, they sent 2 left legs and no right legs, so we had to get them to send us the right body parts.
If you reach out to them, they send them right away. Reaper's really good about that. I will say that. I've had some dealings with them. All right, so we've been at this for a while. So I don't want to. People might be unconscious at their keyboard at this point, and I don't want to be responsible for any sort of seizures or deaths across the country from their heads exploding from taking too much Kane information.
Well, I tell you, we've had more viewers on this than any of my other live shows at any point. We spiked up to 15 at one point.
Woohoo!
So apparently it's interesting.
Kane. So let's give some final thoughts here. Can this be salvaged? If this system, in some fashion, is what happens in 9th, okay, what has to change to make it better? And if you want a moment to think, I'll go first. Okay.
Go for it.
You go ahead.
All right. So to me, what has to change to make this better is to decrease the amount of nonsensical, time-consuming randomness and bookkeeping. It's too much of a barrier for new players, and there's too much time being consumed on a phase where the end could be you get 1 more spell off sometimes, or 8 more spells off the other times when their wizards are dead. The already swingiest phase in the game just got swingier. Magic Phase 2 Electric Boogaloo, this time with 100% more swing. It's just, it got too crazy, and I don't want to see everybody just being like, the right answer is now we take the crappiest unit we've got, file them out there, and whizzes them 10 times, and we're just, boom, look at these strength 10, toughness 10 peasants mowing their way across the countryside. Nothing can stop them except the other strength 10, toughness 10 Ungors just waiting from that herdstone thing. So, I mean, like, this isn't a game I want to see. So, cut the shenanigans, cut the insane randomness, get it under control to where if you want to have some incentive to not 6 dice, fine. If you want to make people lore masters, fine. That's okay. Just still have an important incentive to have a level 4, because if you hand out free lore master candy, now it's just spread low levels. So you need to have good incentive to still have 4 or a couple casters instead of a bunch of low ones. Just design, more at a 45-degree angle so there's some push in both ways. Cut the randomness, make it better for new players. That's me.
So I'll go next. In a concrete way, I mean, I'm not going to look at it as big picture that. As far as just fixing the rule, I think if they just pull out the D6 for determining how many dice you can use for cast and dispel, and you do like Anthony suggested and make it wizard level +1. That kind of grounds everything. It gives you a reason why you're wanting your level 4s, and I think it takes the swinginess out of it. You still have powerful magic phases if you wanted to keep the 46, but it's less. It returns control of the mages to the players, which I think is the primary concern.
Yeah, 100%. Both you and Ant mentioned that when you roll, you have a pile of dice, and somebody rolls a 1 on how many dice they can use to dispel, and you're like, well, guess that just goes off then because I happen to roll 1. That's a terrible feeling. Like, I have this level 4, just under Balthazar Guild caster who should be, like, earth-shattering, but because of 16% chance, nope, sorry, okay, go ahead with your thing. Terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't see GW really changing this too much. I mean, it is playable to me. It's playable, in quotations. Fun, I don't know, but playable, as long as you don't let people recast a spell after it's been successfully dispelled. So they have to clean up that wording there, because until they do, competitive players and people who want that to happen are going to have an argument to stand on, in my opinion. But they do need to streamline it. The one thing I've always been saying whenever I talk about things they may do with Bretonnia or future editions is GW is in a constant process of streamlining, as is business and everything. And this is an opposite of streamlining. It made the game made the phase longer, more complex, more confusing, which goes against everything GW has done in terms of changes, which makes the game more random, simpler to understand and grasp. So they need to find a way, if they want to keep this magic system, to compartmentalize it in such a way that it's faster and it just moves quicker, and it does reduce that kind of bookkeeping. I think that's the only thing they really need to do, but I don't see them being able to do that with the current system they want to deploy, because they want the randomness in there. Well, that requires we both roll a d6 for how many dice we use. We have to roll 46 for the magic phase. I don't see how they can compress it without completely changing what's in the Kane book. That's where I think that, you know, they'll either just forge ahead with it. Well, it's baked now in the oven. We'll just push it out again for round 2 and 9th, or they're just going to have to discard it because it's not streamlining. It's the exact opposite of streamlining.
Agreed. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Everything, I've said it before in some of my videos, GW is constantly sharpening the knife, right? It's just every edition is like sharpening the knife down to try to make things more efficient, more streamlined, etc. And this was just like, oh, just broke the knife off on a rock. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense in any way to me. All right, any final thoughts from anyone?
Not anything about this, but I did want to share a rumor that I've heard about the next army book and what they're going to be combining, the next combined army. I personally believe this. I've actually started making up models for it, and I know it will make Anthony happy, but according to the rumor, we're going to be combining Bretonnia with the ogres. So let's go ahead and get that started, Anthony.
They're going to have to hire some ogres because there's no one left to fight. Like, that's... Ogres love to...
Exactly,
ogres...
that's fluff-wise, that's how they're going to work it.
We have all this gold left in the castles because all the knights are dead. They're not using it. Get all the peasants to go out there with their vacuum cleaners, collect it up, and just give it to the ogres.
Right.
Well, if the peasants get a hold of the gold, they'll just try to eat it. They don't know what to do with it. They've never seen it before in their lives.
Is it food? I don't know. The 6 knights that are left, that'll be the second quest for the Grail. The literal Grails. We have to go gather all the Grails from all the castles so we can give them to the ogres so we can pay them to fight for us. They don't have a home anyway. So that's the new. That we have to make a Monty Python now for Bretonnia, where there's the 6 knights that go out to all the castles with rucksacks, just trying to collect anything valuable to give to the ogres, who are just like standing at the border of Bretonnia, eating the peasants that are fleeing away from everything. You know, the dark elves that are now right in the fucking woods outside Bretonnia, and just waiting. The Scold will be here. The Scold will be here.
See, and it's perfect. It'll be a great story. They'll come up with some new rules to
that's the
make
that's
monstrous
the made the most sense to me in the past 3 months is what we did there. I could totally see myself riding through Bretonnia, like doing drive-bys, collecting like cups and grails and shit off the desks. It's like running through cubicles and collecting all the pens and staplers, like as somebody chases you. It's totally what they would do.
I think it's more like when you're in an office and someone leaves. And then, like, the fog descends and, like, takes all their stuff.
They might not even wait for you to pack your bags. Like, are you sure you want to take that stapler? You have 4 staplers, Bob. You can never have another, you know. They took my red one that binds up.
All right, very good. All right, well, I think that about covers it. Mate, you want to sign us off? It's your channel, sir. I feel it's only right.
All right, I sure will. Thank you, guys. There's been a boatload of folks who've been watching. I hope we were at least entertaining, if not formative. and we'll catch you guys on the next one.